Quaranta has just been released, so it's time to rank all 9 Danny Brown albums from the worst to the best. Taking the bottom spot is Danny Brown's first project, Hot Soup. Even though it's been 15 years since this release, there's still a lot to appreciate here. It's fascinating to hear Danny hone in his unique style and trying to make a mark in the Detroit hip hop scene. This mixtape showcases Danny's honesty, a trait that will become a lot more detailed in his future albums. The project's energy is relentless, with Danny's distinctive voice cutting through the beats with unapologetic precision. Tracks like What Up Doe and Re-Up highlight his clever wordplay and vivid storytelling, offering a glimpse into the world he has navigated in the early phase of his career. Although the production isn't refined as his later works, there's a raw charm that adds to the mixtape's appeal. I feel like Hot Soup can be seen as a time capsule, capturing Danny Brown's early experimentation with his style. The Hybrid from 2010 takes the 8th spot. This album gives a deeper dive into Danny's raw lyricism, and it feels like a step forward from Hot Soup, shedding light on the challenges and realities he's faced growing up. I'm particularly impressed with the increased artistry here. The album successfully blends hip-hop, electronic beats and punk influences, showcasing Danny's boldness in pushing the boundaries of different genres. However, this project doesn't always fully realise the potential of genre exploration that Danny aims for, and there are noticeable shortcomings in production quality, which I'd say is something expected early in his career. Much like Hot Soup, I see Hybrid as a snapshot of Danny's early evolution as an artist. It's intriguing to witness the roots of his unique style taking shape in these earlier works. In 7th place on my list is Old, the 2013 album from Danny Brown. While Triple X marked a significant step forward in Danny's career, Old doesn't quite push the narrative about his life further. It reflects on his tumultuous Detroit life, touching on alcohol and substance abuse, but it feels somewhat predictable compared to what we've heard before. I do appreciate some aspects of the production, especially the use of melodic elements, showcasing Danny's sonic progression as an artist. The album is cleverly divided into 2 halves. The first capturing is the raw intensity of his youth, and the second delving into the realities of his life as a successful artist. Each half features a distinct musical style, with the first leaning towards more old school hip hop feel and the second incorporating more trap elements. However, some of the EDM and trap crossover songs in the latter half sound a bit dated now, and I often find myself skipping them. While Old is a decent addition to his discography, when seeking a deeper look into his mind, I tend to turn to other albums rather than this one. In 6th place on my list is Black and Brown, which is a collaborative EP between Danny Brown and producer Black Milk, released in 2011. Although short in length, Black and Brown has some fantastic production, which seems far beyond the time that this was produced. The project came out in 2011, but if you told me that this was released in 2019, I probably would have believed you. Danny demonstrates a great understanding of how to ride Black Milk's beats here, and despite not being at his unhinged peak, comes through with a lot of charisma. Although I enjoyed this one a lot, I don't see it as a project I'll be returning to very often, as it didn't leave much of an impact on me. I enjoyed it, and that's good enough. Next on the list is Danny Brown's album Triple X or 30. This is where Danny's unique style really shines, with honest lyrics, unconventional flows, and a willingness to dive into darker experiences. The album is divided into acts, each painting a picture of Danny's turbulent life in Detroit. I love the diverse production, ranging from gritty and lo-fi to polished and experimental sounds. However, I do find some of the production to sound a little dated. I'm not such a fan of the strip club sound that a lot of the early 2010s rap songs had, and there's a bit of that in here. Lyrically, Danny doesn't hold back, addressing issues like drug abuse and poverty and the impact of street life. The reason that this album is placed here on my list is because I feel like it laid the groundwork for the honest, raw storytelling that it build on in future projects. But in terms of how influential this is for Danny's career, it is right up there. In the comments, let me know how you rank all of Danny Brown's albums. Also, if you're enjoying the video, then do me a favour and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to build a community of music lovers to have discussions with, and I want you to be a part of that too. So hit subscribe and join this amazing music loving community. Unfortunately for me, Quaranta only makes it to 4th place on my list. I say unfortunately because I feel like Danny marketed this album as being a spiritual follow-up to Atrocity Exhibition. However, I feel like Danny approaches this album in a much more contemplative way, much like the closing track of that project, but he barely scratches the surface in the way he did in his previous projects. To this point, I feel like his style's been so introspective, so when it comes to this album, I feel like it's really weird to hear him in a much better place, but not willing to go back and recall his past traumas. Obviously, it's great that he's in a better place, but he felt like a better place in previous projects too, while still digging deep into his past. All that being said, I really enjoy the range of instrumentals here. It feels like everything he was shooting for from his earlier work now sounds much more polished, but in a raw way, if that makes sense. I particularly enjoyed YBP featuring Casa Overall, who I wasn't familiar with before, but came in such a unique and strange verse that just makes you sit up in your seat. The sample is really nice and the drums are wild, especially in the breakdown where Casa Overall comes up. Danny is still a top tier rapper, that much is evident, but when you're used to hearing one style, it'll be hard to get used to less willingness to dive into the deep experiences that shaped his career. In third place is Danny Brown's 2019 album, Uknowhatimsayin, which is a bit of a departure from his earlier work. There is a noticeable shift, a sense of maturity and refinement that wasn't as prominent on his past projects. And I believe this is due to the production mainly led by Q-Tip. It introduces a jazzy and soulful vibe, a departure from the grittier sounds of previous albums. Everything feels smoother and more polished, and I can't say I hate it. Listen to Uknowhatimsayin, it's clear that Danny Brown's style has evolved significantly. There's a newfound clarity and confidence, and I can't help but wonder if having hip-hop legend Q-Tip in your corner contributes to that. Lyrically, Danny is still sharp and witty, but there's a shift in focus. This project leans more on reflection than his previous works. Danny sounds more self-assured, almost content, a significant shift considering the intense themes of Atrocity Exhibition. The album boasts some noteworthy collaborations and featuring artists like Run the Jewels and JPEG Mafia. It's impressive how, despite his unique style, Danny always manages to maintain a natural chemistry with his collaborators. Uknowhatimsayin provides a welcome break from his earlier works, showcasing a more mature and reflective side. Given Danny's past, it's refreshing to witness this growth. However, I must admit, it didn't impact me as profoundly as some of his higher ranked albums on my list. In at number 2 is Danny Brown's groundbreaking album, Atrocity Exhibition. One of the most unique experiences I've ever had listening to a hip hop album. This thing is so dark and experimental and such a wild ride. Downward Spiral gets right into it and completely sets the tone for the album. It's a dark, gritty instrumental, and the lyrics delve into the current state of Danny's life and mind. Lyrically, Danny was on it with this record, bringing some of his best performances too. The bulk of the lyrical content dives into the addiction problems he has faced, and whereas his previous albums felt like they played on the drug party antics, this album feels like the come down following those projects. What is a tremendous achievement is how he's able to deliver this content without fetishizing drug use or his story. It really is a dark look into the realities of drug addiction. I really love the elements of industrial hip hop here. I find it works so well in the context of this album, along with some sections that I find almost nightmarish. I feel like the horror of the content really breaks through in all aspects here. Some of the gritty beats are so mind-boggling, yet somehow Danny finds a way to ride them effortlessly. Danny once said about this album, never spend 70,000 on samples for an album that no one buys because then you'll be in debt. Now this is hilarious, but it also shows the dedication Danny had for reaching his artistic peak here. I'd go as far as to say this is the album where he finds a way to meld his manic delivery with the insanely experimental instrumentals to create something simultaneously listenable and unlistenable. The other thing I want to mention here is that all the features come through. The producers also need a shout out here with beats from The Alchemist and Black Milk adding a lot of dimension to the album. The whole project just leaves you questioning how did they pull this album off. I understand that Danny is rapping about his experiences taking and dealing drugs, but my god, the beats on this thing are so strange that I couldn't ever imagine formulating them. This isn't one for the faint of heart, but if you can get past the elements of experimental hip hop, and I understand that's the majority of this album, then it is one of the best explorations of the effects of drug use on the mind I've ever heard. But for me, Danny Brown's best album is his collaboration with JPEG Mafia, Scaring the Hoes. I feel as though this album brings out the best of Danny while also demonstrating excellent chemistry with JPEG Mafia on these incredibly strange bangers. Before the release of this album, many fans, including me, were wondering how much of a part Danny would have to play in this project, particularly considering how meticulous Peggy has been when it's come to being producing his own music. But Scaring the Hoes comes across as an album that both artists were just so passionate to make, oozing with the creativity of two of the biggest quote-unquote underground artists. And I phrase it like that because these two are well aware of their place in hip-hop culture, with the album title being a nod to the fact that their music isn't exactly the go-to choice to play in front of people who you want to look at you as someone with a sane mind. The first half of this album really is banger after banger, and the pacing is almost like getting caught in a tornado. The production is insane, but it's so layered, featuring many different experimental styles, all of which complement Danny and Peggy so perfectly. We really see Danny at his unhinged best here, and I love it. The production is even more mind-blowing when you consider that JPEG Mafia produced this thing entirely on an SP404, a legendary machine as far as hip-hop goes. This must have been an epic task, and I'm not surprised that he's said that he's finished with using it for now since the release of this album. What they were able to pull off here is an experimental album that is a lot of fun, strangely accessible, and definitely my favourite hip-hop project of 2023. And that is why it is first on my list.